I think the king right now, his best bet would be to distance himself completely, make it clear to Harry that the Sussexes are not welcome at all in Britain for a very, very long time.
A growing scandal involving Prince Harry and his last remaining genuine charity project, the Invictus Games. But is it really a charity project at all?
Meghan Markle being furious with the royal family because of the snub that they gave to Harry around his stay at Buckingham Palace.
The Vancouver Games last year for Invictus cost $63 million. And I'm trying to figure out where the money went.
Prematurely, if you like, accepting an invitation to open the Games.
I don't think she'd have played her as well as Claire Foy played her in A Very British Scandal.
According to the script, around $63 million was spent on a single event, while in the same year the grants intended for wounded veterans were reportedly reduced by 63%. The situation was presented as a striking contrast that raised questions about priorities and financial decisions. The script also claims that major supporters, including Boeing and Australia, withdrew their involvement, and that a board member resigned unexpectedly, further adding to the controversy surrounding the organization.
The most recent games, held in Vancouver and Whistler in February 2025, brought together 543 wounded military veterans from 23 countries. The total cost 63.2 million Canadian, or approximately $118,352 per competitor.
According to the script, for years few public figures were willing to express this criticism openly. It then states that author Tombower addressed the issue directly in his book, where he reportedly referred to the Vancouver Invictus Games as the Meghan Games, rather than using their official name. The script presents this as a reflection of Bower's view that the event had become overly associated with Meghan, suggesting that understanding his perspective could change how some people interpret the couple's public role.
She would have normally been there because Invictus has always been her showcase event. Invictus was Meghan, whether it was in Vancouver or Düsseldorf or The Hague. That is where Meghan was able to star and revive her great image of the smiling Duchess. Now, I think people will say, what on earth is this woman doing here? On the arm of a man, as I say, exposed as a liar and having lost all that money. And he's got financial problems now. He's not covered by the insurance for such a huge amount.
According to the script, Tombower argues that the Invictus Games increasingly became associated with the Sussexes' public image. It claims that following the reported underperformance of their Netflix deal, Bower suggests Prince Harry agreed to give Meghan a more prominent role at the Invictus Games. The script presents this as Bower's interpretation that an event created to honor and support wounded and injured military veterans became increasingly focused on the couple's public profile, rather than solely on the athletes and their achievements.
Well, that has all now gone sour. That's all now gone really bad for the Sussexes. So they have
what was the objective in them doing that?
Well, to get to resurrection, be the royal family, somehow find a way in which they could monetize themselves through being accepted again in Britain. But of course, they're not apologizing. They have no contrition for the terrible things they've done over the last 5 years. So I never understood exactly how they thought it would play out, except that...
According to the script, critics argue that the Invictus Games, originally established by Prince Harry to recognize and support wounded service personnel and veterans, gradually became a platform that also enhanced Meghan's public image. The script presents this as an interpretation rather than a confirmed fact, suggesting that some observers believe the event's public focus shifted over time. Whether this perception is accurate remains a matter of opinion, and there is no official confirmation supporting this claim.
There's an irony here that Harry is spending millions of dollars taking the Daily Mail to court and their owners for an invasion of privacy when the only commercial success Harry has is invading his family's privacy. Has that not dawned on him that if you go read the biography that they paste on whatever, speech Harry's giving at whatever Honda convention in Ohio now these days, because now he's a motivational speaker, I guess. They all say, you know, that he wrote this sensational book that everybody loved, this best-selling book, and they talk about the Netflix series. Like, if his bullet points are these 2 projects that tore his family to shreds and, you know, really disrupted their privacy, how does he have the audacity to go sit in a courtroom and try to take somebody to task for doing the same thing to him?
The script encourages viewers to revisit footage from the Vancouver and Dusseldorf Invictus Games, arguing that the media coverage placed significant attention on Meghan during the events. Referring to Tom Bower's interpretation, it claims that the focus gradually shifted away from the wounded veterans and toward the couple's public image, with Meghan frequently becoming the center of headlines and camera coverage. This reflects Bower's perspective and the views of some critics, rather than an established fact, and others may interpret the same events differently.
I think, you know, when you get to be a person like Harry, you don't really have much self-awareness, let alone self-criticism, let alone allow yourself to be surrounded by people who say, well, you know, are you absolutely sure that that's accurate? And they'd be living in a bubble. They've been living in a self-fabricated bubble where they have effectively believed themselves to be the victims.
Yes.
Well, now they're not the victims, they're the perpetrators.
The script goes on to cite claims attributed to Tom Bower, stating that 2 Canadian Invictus Games executives who were reportedly involved with the organization left their positions after becoming dissatisfied with the influence of the Sussexes. It further claims that, according to Bower, one insider described Meghan as representing bling, not rehabilitation, suggesting that the focus had shifted away from the game's mission of supporting wounded and injured veterans. These statements reflect allegations and opinions attributed to Bower and unnamed sources, and they have not been independently verified as established fact.
If I was him, I would be annoyed because, you know, it puts pressure on him and it puts him in a difficult position. I mean, let's be clear. When the Invictus Games were launched in London back in 2014, the monarch, Queen Elizabeth, she didn't attend. You know, then Prince Charles and Camilla did, and Prince William, but the monarch didn't. So there's no obligation for the king to attend these games next year. You know, but I'm sure he might want to. He'll support ex-servicemen. But the whole way it's been done is awkward and I would say unpleasant.
The script then shifts its focus from public appearances and speeches to questions about finances and event management. It claims that the Vancouver Invictus Games carried a total cost of approximately $63 million for an event involving around 500 competitors over a period of about 10 days. The script presents these figures as a basis for criticism, arguing that observers began scrutinizing budgets, expenditures, and organizational decisions more closely as discussions about the games continued.
This is complete drama, and I believe the drama comes from Harry's wife. And I always explain why, because it makes a lot of sense to me. And I'm sure to a lot of you it makes sense as well, because now reports are claiming that Meghan Markle is furious. The girl is angry. The girl is completely lost her mind. They say she is not just upset or a little disappointed about what happened with Harry being turned away from Buckingham Palace. She is actually furious. And let me tell you why she's furious. You want to know why she's furious? Because she wants a reason to be furious.
The script contrasts the reported cost of the Invictus Games with other military sporting events, claiming that the U.S. Warrior Games operate on an annual budget of around $2 million, while Germany reportedly organized a similar event for approximately $200,000. It then argues that the reported $63 million cost of the Vancouver Invictus Games appears disproportionately high by comparison, raising questions about spending and financial management. These comparisons are presented as claims within the script and should be independently verified before being treated as factual.
Last year in Vancouver, that was $63 million. And I thought, oh gosh, you know, that's a hefty amount of change. And I thought, why did it jump up $20 million? You know, and so I've been looking at government deals or government reportings, and I just, you know, but I kept coming back to this budget here. this Invictus Games 2025 expense budget, something kept, I would go and I would like get lost in another, like in the Sydney Games. And I'd go, no, but I gotta look at this pie chart.
The script then introduces Rachel, describing her as a former finance professional and airline pilot with experience analyzing financial records. According to the script, she examined the Invictus Games' publicly available financial documents in an effort to understand how the reported funds were spent. It states that she reviewed expenses such as accommodation, catering, transportation, airfare, staffing, and executive salaries, carefully tracing the available figures while making what the script describes as conservative and generous assumptions throughout her analysis.
For comparison, the US Warrior Games, a similar competition for wounded American service members, runs on roughly $2 million a year. Germany's Invictus-style competition costs about $200,000 and involves half as many participants. The public's taxes footed a portion of the bill. According to tax returns on file, the public picked up half the tab for Vancouver, with the Canadian federal government contributing $15 million through the Veterans Affairs Canada and the province of British Columbia contributing another $15 million through its Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Sport.
The script claims that Rachel based her calculations on generous estimates, including full hotel rates and other standard event expenses, rather than attempting to minimize the costs. According to the script, her review accounted for approximately $13 to $14 million in expenses, after which she said she could no longer match the remaining funds to the available financial records. The script quotes her as joking that she must really suck at math, suggesting that, despite reviewing the published documents from multiple angles, she was unable to determine where the rest of the reported expenditure had gone. These statements reflect the script's account of her analysis and should not be interpreted as verified findings without independent confirmation.
So here we have, this is the original budget. It's $60 million. Okay, first and foremost. And I want you to pay attention to two numbers: accommodation and catering at 18%, and workforce at 18%. Now, if we're using this 60 million, right? So 1% of 60 million is 600,000. So if you look at like ceremonies and villages, you're going, okay, well that's 6 million, right? 600,000 times 10. Okay, that's 6 million. Technology and broadcast, okay, that's like a little bit over, 6 times 12 is what? 7.2 million. You go, okay. Same thing with marketing and partnerships. All right.
The script claims that Rachel's investigation became more complicated when she looked for additional details in an official Canadian government budget document. According to the script, she found that certain sections of the document were heavily redacted, including pages related to budget information. It describes her reaction as frustration after expecting the document to provide further clarity, but instead finding portions that were unavailable. The script presents this as another reason for questions surrounding the transparency of the financial records, although the significance of the redactions would require verification from the original documents and official sources.
Accommodation and catering and workforce. Now, if we scroll up and we look at the expense highlights, pay attention to the last two numbers there. 11,168,869 for workforce, including staffing with a workforce comprised of 90% of volunteers giving their time and passion to play their part in the game's success. 90%, $11 million. So, and then we have $10.7 million for accommodations and catering. Okay, all right. Now, the Invictus Games have always had about 500 players. It's not like they started with 100 and now they have 1,000, right? And it's like, well, yeah, of course that went up tenfold, right? It's always been around 500. So Dusseldorf was 40, Invictus Vancouver was 63 million.
The script claims that after Rachel shared the redacted document and encouraged people to seek further clarification from the government, the Invictus Canada website became temporarily unavailable a few hours later. It further alleges that when the website returned, the document was no longer accessible and that changes had been made to the site, including requiring users to create an account to access certain materials. The script presents these events as evidence of an attempt to limit access to information, though such claims would need to be verified through official records and independent sources.
I think that was an error, and I found it in a Canadian, a state document that was by the Canadian government. Anyway, but we'll return to that later. Let's go over accommodation and catering, because that was the first one. All right, so accommodation and catering. So I went on the hunt to figure out where they were staying, and I found in this document, in the Family and Friends Information Guide, I found out where they were staying. So, and this document will also be down below. And there was something that I found interesting. There was the Friends and Family program that was related to the Invictus Games, where they would pay for the accommodation of 2 friends and family, so 1 room per competitor. Very noble. Love it.
The script raises questions about the organization's response to the reported concerns, asking why a charity supporting wounded veterans would face such scrutiny. It then argues that the most significant issue is not only the reported spending figures, document changes, or website concerns, but a specific financial figure that it claims comes from the charity's own accounts submitted to the UK Charity Commission. The script presents this as a key piece of information, suggesting that official financial records are central to understanding the situation. Any conclusions, however, would depend on reviewing the original documents and verified financial data.
I could not find any kind of an entry fee for the athletes, but I also didn't find that all veterans were allowed into the Invictus Games. So I don't know if you had to go through like a sponsorship model to get in. I don't know what the cost was. I can't find anything. If you guys want to be able to, if you help a girl out here, okay? So I don't know if there was an entrance fee. What I will say though, that is interesting, is that it does mention buy-in packages for our friends and family. And here in this PDF here, we have a little slideshow. They have the buy-in package. A limited number of in-room buy-in packages could be available for purchase. These would usually be for minor children sharing a room with a parent and siblings who are sponsored by the friends and family.
The script claims that in 2024, the Invictus Games Foundation reduced its direct grants to veteran organizations by 63%, decreasing from more than £500,000 to around £200,000. It then contrasts this with claims that the organization's income increased by 41% during the same period, and that its reserves grew significantly. The script also states that a new 6-figure executive position was created, and that the highest paid individual earned more than £120,000. These figures are presented as points of concern within the script, though they would need to be confirmed through official financial reports and records.
Now, I think that this was done in error, because I went, you're going to love this, I went and I found the British Columbia Contribution Agreement, which includes a labor force and volunteers plan. So here's the contribution agreement between His Majesty the King, in right of the province of British Columbia, and the Vancouver Whistler Games Corporation. So I read through all of this, and I was reading, oh my God, it's redacted. The recipient agrees that it will not apply the contribution towards any costs, expenses, fees, or payments. That's weird. A government document redacted? What? Anyway, so you keep going down, and then you see this. Both operating costs and legacy projects, and redacted.
The script goes on to highlight what it describes as a significant increase in legal expenses, claiming that the charity's legal fees rose from approximately £45,000 to £150,000. It presents this increase as a point of concern, questioning why such a rise occurred and suggesting that further explanation would be needed to understand the reason behind the additional costs. The purpose and context of these expenses would depend on the details provided in the organization's official financial records.
That is equal to 177 staff members. A little different than the 90, but not too far off, you know. So how much do these executives get paid? Well, I'm so glad you asked. If you look at, I found a job posting, and this is for the head of finance for the Invictus Games. Salary for this position is $130,000 to $150,000. Okay, comprehensive benefits are also provided. 2-year contract. Cool. All right, we got that. So I'm going to go back and do my little math here. So 9 executives, and I'm going to pay all of them $150,000, right? 9 executives at $150,000 is $1.3 million. We're going to multiply that by 2, okay? Because remember, it's a 2-year contract. So that's $2.7 million total, okay?
The script highlights another financial claim involving a payment made by the charity to an American for-profit company. According to the script, the organization received nearly £30,000 in 1 year, followed by no further payments the next year, while the purpose of the transaction was not clearly explained in the information being discussed. The script presents this as a point requiring further clarification, although understanding the payment would require reviewing the charity's official records and any available details about the company involved.
The Invictus Games Foundation, the British charity at the centre of the operation, recently filed its 2024 annual accounts with the UK Charity Commission after a 2-year grace period. The numbers, Paula reports, raised red flags. In 2024, the foundation cut its direct grants to veteran organisations by 63%, from £534,973 to just £200,328. The same year, that foundation income rose 41%, a new 6-figure executive role was added, and cash reserves grew to $2.3 million.
The script summarizes its concerns by claiming that, according to the financial information being discussed, the organization experienced higher income, a substantial increase in reserves, higher executive compensation, increased legal expenses, and payments to an unidentified U.S.-based company. At the same time, it alleges that direct grants to organizations supporting wounded veterans were significantly reduced. The script presents these points together to question the charity's financial priorities, while any conclusions about the figures or their significance would require careful examination of the official accounts and supporting documentation.
The foundation's highest paid staff are earned between £120,000 and £130,000 above typical UK charity sector norms. Other interesting things of note: legal fees jumped from £45,000 to £155,000 with no explanation given. Deferred income ballooned fourfold from £431,000 to £1.799 million. An American for-profit company called June's LLC, with no description of purpose, received nearly £30,000 in 2023 and nothing in 2024. And the same filing contains 2 different company registration numbers, one on the cover page, another on the balance sheet.
The script describes Rachel's perspective on the impact of the reported funding changes by comparing the amount of money involved to the everyday financial realities faced by people in lower-income countries. It argues that the funds reduced from veteran support programs could represent life-changing assistance, such as accessibility improvements, medical equipment, or support services for disabled veterans. The script uses this comparison to emphasize the potential human impact behind financial decisions, while the actual effect would depend on verified funding figures and how the organization allocated its resources.
The foundation publicly claims that 92% of every pound spent goes towards charitable activities, a figure that technically falls within UK Charity Commission guidelines. But the term charitable activities includes the cost of running the games themselves, not direct grants or services to veterans.
The script then shifts from financial issues to concerns about the public image of the Invictus Games. It claims that Meghan was encouraged to take on a more prominent role at the event and argues that this led some observers to believe the focus was moving away from the wounded veterans. Referring to reported claims about Dominic Reed, the former chief executive of the Invictus Games Foundation, the script alleges that he was concerned the games were increasingly being perceived as the Harry and Meghan show, with media attention centered on the couple rather than on the competitors. These statements reflect claims presented in the script and should be understood as allegations and reported opinions rather than established facts.
But please, honestly, please, if any of you are saying, Rachel, it costs this much or it costs that much, because I am pulling up room rates, I am pulling up, I'm doing airfare, I'm literally just I mean, I used to be a bookkeeper. I was in finance before I went into aviation. So I know what things cost. I know, and even if you tag on taxes for that $12 million, right? We do, I don't know, 40% taxes, right? That comes out to 16 million, somewhere around there, out of 21.
The script claims that tensions reportedly increased to the point where some participants considered withdrawing from the games because they felt the attention had shifted away from the athletes and toward Meghan. It presents this as a concern that the veterans, who are central to the purpose of the event, felt overshadowed by media coverage and public attention surrounding the couple. These claims are presented within the script and would require confirmation from participants or official sources to determine their accuracy.
I think it's people get freaked out by tax returns. And I also think sometimes people are a little bit lazy. They hear things, they say, oh, Invictus Games, 4 wounded warriors, which sounds like the Wounded Warrior Games. And people think, oh, this must be great. And a lot of people are unclear how to read a tax return or to check stats. And so I think it was just very easy to say, oh, the Invictus Games, it's great. It does all this. And then you start looking into it and you're like, hey, what the heck is going on here? Those 535 competitors had to pay their own way. They had to pay their own housing for the games. They had to pay for their own equipment. And Harry and Meghan got a really nice vacation out of it with lots of adorational speeches and clapping and crowds gathered for them.
The script argues that public attention surrounding the Invictus Games often focused more on Meghan's appearance and clothing than on the personal stories and achievements of the veteran participants. It claims that media coverage highlighted the value of her outfits, creating a contrast between luxury fashion and the sacrifices made by wounded service members. The script presents this contrast as a source of criticism among some observers who believe the focus should remain primarily on the veterans and their journeys. However, media coverage of the event has included a variety of perspectives, and interpretations of its focus can differ.
Harry and Meghan came in for 10 minutes for an adoring love shot, and of course, Meghan kissed Harry. And it looked like it was good and full. It wasn't. So I think the public interest is waning. And also in this time of economic disparity, people really want to know where their money is going to. And there are lots of other places that actually support veterans, may give them prosthetics if they need, may build a wheelchair ramp at their home, which is necessary, may do things that really help people as opposed to helping Harry's ego.
The script refers to Tombower's criticism of the Sussexes and highlights his view of how he believes they approach public causes and events. It states that Bower used a strong phrase to describe what he sees as their tendency to associate themselves with meaningful issues for personal benefit. The script also claims that, when asked whether Meghan was responsible for the controversies being discussed, Bower gave a direct and highly critical response. These statements reflect Bower's personal opinions and interpretations as presented in his work, rather than universally established facts.
If you asked all of those competitors at the Invictus Games, what is more important here, you could get a check today for $120,000, which would transform your life, or you could be part of what is effectively a PR stunt. I mean, all of those details and betrayal were just so damning. Like, the audiences were basically shipped in to sit around Harry and Meghan to make it look as if it was a popular event, whereas actually there were just a handful of people watching most of the games. As you say, a lot of these competitors were not in their wheelchairs, and apparently, Paula, you're totally un-PC if you point that out, because some of them may have mental scars. But I'm sorry, that was never my understanding of what the Invictus Games was about.
And then he said the line that has echoed everywhere since: Meghan is a source of evil. He said it years ago, and it cost him, but he turned right back around and said it again without a flicker of hesitation. Because to Bower, the reasoning is simple and damning. He believes she only ever thinks of herself, focusing on self-promotion, profit, and endlessly polishing her own image, without caring who gets hurt or pushed aside along the way. According to his telling, she has behaved disgracefully and has never truly made amends. He claims that she used Harry as a vehicle, used the royal family itself to get exactly what she wanted, and then discarded the rest.
He is always he's always the victim. And of course, that is the product of therapy. But you know, he's always in the right. But now...
Go ahead, finish
Well, I think now he's on the other side of the fence. He is now the person who is the liar. He is now the person who is a perpetrator, and there are victims of his vendetta, of his feud, of slaying the dragons. He's self-slain. He's caused his own... It's a reputational suicide. Let's put it no milder than that.
Right.
And he has now got to find a way somehow to save himself. I think Meghan, she realizes how serious it is because people aren't going to let it forget it. You know, she called my book the product of a deranged conspirator.
Then he delivered the part that should genuinely make her nervous tonight. The entire idea of her brainwashing Harry, pulling his strings, and steering him into an open war with his own family is something Bauer believes is now coming back around. Bauer says it is all about to return to her, and in his exact words, she is going to get it back in spades. That is not just a man casually guessing at a storyline. This is Tom Bauer, a writer who has built entire books around these two, telling you confidently what he believes is already coming toward her. So the question now hangs there, impossible to ignore after everything that has happened. The missing millions, the disappearing sponsors, and the veterans she allegedly stepped in front of. Would she really dare show her face at Invictus again? Here is where the pressure truly begins to close in, because the people with the money have already made their decision, and they made it without her. Boeing is gone. A presenting sponsor that proudly announced a long-term partnership back in 2023 has now quietly confirmed that it will not be involved with Birmingham 2027.
So I think it's the royal family versus the Sussexes. And today, the royal family won. But in the end, of course, you can easily say nobody's won because this battle in public is a catastrophe for the royal family. And that has been hugely damaging. And what they've said, and is all still on the record, has got terrible reverberations around the world.
I do think that people are starting to cotton on. Again, when we look at the numbers of corporate sponsors lining up for Birmingham, there really aren't that many, and we don't know who they are. Only 11. Now, Boeing has, I believe, cut ties. I am doing that story for News Nation. It'll come out later today about how Boeing was the huge sponsor. The contract has ended and they are not re-signing. So Harry has to go to Birmingham this summer. He has to drum up some sort of business because at this point, A, it's just embarrassing. And B, you know, yes, government funds are supposed to cover about half, but the other half are supposed to come from private companies and private individuals.
And when a giant like Boeing steps off the deck, everyone notices which way they are walking. One observer put it perfectly. It is like watching everyone flee a sinking ship. Then Australia's government walked away from a $9 million commitment, reportedly blindsiding the organization in the process. They allegedly found out only minutes before the announcement went public. The vice chairman of the Birmingham board resigned overnight with no explanation given. And here is the detail that shows just how damaging the situation has become. Qualified people were reportedly turning down jobs the moment they heard the word Invictus attached. Not because of the money or the role, but because of the name itself. When industry professionals would rather walk away than have that charity on their resume, it suggests the issue is no longer just a public relations problem. It points toward a reputation crisis, one that even those closest to the situation can already sense. You know, she is a publicity fiend.
You know, she is a publicity fiend.
Yeah.
She is so hungry for publicity and recognition. So
will she leak the way that they've been leaking in the last few weeks about this specific trip?
I think that they will have a think whether it's going to financially profit them.
Yeah.
That's their problem. And I think much will happen in the way in which he is received for the rest of the week. I think that is his problem.
15 months out, Birmingham has just 11 sponsors and around £4 million in a city that literally declared bankruptcy in 2023, now somehow on the hook for games that could cost $45 million or more. That is the wreckage. And Bauer doesn't believe Meghan wants to be photographed standing in the middle of it, on the arm of a man freshly humiliated and drowning in bills. His phrase, "She does not want to be on the arm of a loser." Her whole brand was built on winning, on glowing, on floating serenely above it all. But, and he could not be clearer, never underestimate these two when they smell profit. He says the British public is sick to death of the Sussexes, absolutely sick of the sight of
15 months out, Birmingham has just 11 sponsors and around $4 million in funding, in a city that literally declared bankruptcy in 2023. Now, somehow, it is facing responsibility for games that could cost $45 million or more. That is the scale of the wreckage. And Bauer does not believe Meghan wants to be photographed standing in the middle of it, alongside a man who has been publicly embarrassed and is facing mounting financial pressure. His words were clear. She does not want to be on the arm of a loser. According to Bauer, her entire brand was built around winning, success, glamour, and maintaining the image of someone who always rises above problems. But he also says never to underestimate the pair when they see an opportunity for profit. He claims that the British public is sick to death of the Sussexes and tired of seeing them in the spotlight at the same time. He warns that if they see a way to benefit from the situation, they would still find a way to become involved. According to his argument, it was never about loyalty, never about Harry, and never about the veterans, but about one simple question. Does showing up make money or cost money? With Boeing gone, Australia gone, the finances surrounded by uncertainty, and questions being raised about funding priorities, the controversy continues to grow. Tom Bauer breaks down more of this situation in the videos on your screen right now.